Today's episode is brought to you by the Daily Gardener Friday newsletter. You can sign up for the newsletter over at thedailygardener.org. Hi there, and welcome to The Daily Gardener, a podcast about garden history and literature. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling, and today is May 9th. And before we get to today's show, I want to wish you a happy National Public Gardens Week. It occurs this week, starting May 6th, and runs through the 15th. The celebration started back in 2009 as part of the effort to bring attention to the country's public gardens. Go Public Gardens is an ongoing initiative to drive the 3 V's that are necessary for a healthy public garden: visit, value, and volunteer. Those are the 3 elements that make for a successful public garden. And you can be part of the celebration this week by visiting a public garden in your area. And by the way, you can find gardens near you on the interactive garden map in today's show notes. All right, here's today's garden history. Today we begin with the birth of Henri Cassini, the French botanist and naturalist. He was born on this day, May 9th, in 1781. Henri's second great-grandfather was the famous Italian astronomer Giovanni Domenico Cassini, and he discovered Jupiter's Great Red Spot and the Cassini division in Saturn rings. And so, to differentiate Henri Cassini from his ancestors, Henri is often called Cassini V. He's the 5th generation of Cassinis. Henri became a lawyer, and like many professionals, botany was a hobby for Henri, and his heart belonged to the sunflower family. And it was fitting that the genus Cassinia, or the sunflower genus, was named in his honor by the botanist Robert Brown. Henri's work had staying power. Many of his sunflower descriptions and observations are still valid now, over 2 centuries later. Henri married his cousin and had no children. He died of cholera at 50, and he was the last of the Cassini name, a punctuation mark on the wonderful Cassini legacy. And it was on this day, May 9th in 1807, that Lewis and Clark returned a book that they had borrowed from Benjamin Smith Barton. Before starting their incredible expedition, Meriwether Lewis had visited Barton at his home. Meriwether left with a copy of The History of Louisiana by Antoine LePage. Meriwether memorialized the gesture in the flyleaf of the book. He wrote, "Dr. Benjamin Smith Barton was so obliging as to lend me this copy of Monsieur LePage's History of Louisiana in June of 1803. It has been since conveyed by me to the Pacific Ocean and through the interior of North America, and it's now returned to its proprietor by his friend and obedient servant, Meriwether Lewis, Philadelphia, May 9th, 1807. And today we also celebrate the birthday of the Scottish novelist and playwright James Matthew Barrie, who was born on this day, May 9th, in 1860. James is best remembered as the creator and author of Peter Pan, and he drew inspiration from the real world's Kensington Gardens. In 1912, James commissioned Sir George Frampton to build a statue of Peter Pan in Kensington Gardens, and it's been a favorite of visitors to the park ever since. Well, gardens and flowers were also sources of inspiration for James, and the following are just a few samples of his garden-inspired prose. James wrote, "There is almost nothing that has such a keen sense of fun as a fallen leaf." He also wrote, "The unhappy hook was as impotent as he was damp, and he fell forward like a cut flower." James also wrote, "All children, except one, grow up. They soon know that they will grow up. And the way Wendy knew was this. One day when she was 2 years old, she was playing in a garden, and she plucked another flower and ran with it to her mother. I suppose she must have looked rather delightful, for Mrs. Darling put a hand to her heart and cried, "Ah, why can't you remain like this forever?" This was all that passed between them on the subject, but henceforth Wendy knew that she must grow up. You always know after you're two. It's the beginning of the end. And today we also celebrate the birth of Sophie Scholl, the German student and anti-Nazi activist. She was born on this day, May 9th, in 1921. Sophie was part of the White Rose nonviolent Nazi resistance group that was started by her brother Hans. The two were arrested and convicted of high treason after distributing anti-war leaflets at the University of Munich. Sophie was executed by guillotine. Her last words were, "Long live freedom." And in 2021, Sophie was commemorated in Germany on a special sterling silver collector's coin issued on her 100th birthday. It was Sophie Scholl, the leader of the White Rose movement, who said, "Who would have thought it was possible that a tiny little flower could preoccupy a person so completely that there simply wasn't room for any other thought?" It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, Patina Living by Steve Giannetti and Brooke Giannetti. Well, if you're a longtime listener of the show, you know that I recommended Stephen and Brooke's second book, Patina Farm, just a few weeks ago. But this is actually their third book, and it's called Patina Living, and it came out in 2019. And as the publisher says, this is the heartwarming story of how the Giannettis live and entertain in the well-designed and lushly planted gardens of their farm in Ojai, California. So this book is truly dedicated to the gardens there on the property. Now, just to give you the full overview of all the Giannetti books, because I think they're all fantastic, their first book came out in 2011, and that was called Patina Style. Now, that book was all about their interior design. And then the second book, the book that I just profiled a few weeks ago, is called Patina Farm. And that's talking about basically the entire property, inside and out, including the gardens. And now this third book, Patina Living, is all about the gardens. And then, of course, after this one, there's one called Patina Homes. But this book in particular is the one that we're talking about today, and it is Patina Living. And they don't call it Patina Gardens, essentially because there is so much life in these gardens. There are outdoor rooms, there are kitchen gardens, there are animals. There's just so much going on outdoors for the family, and I think that's why they chose to call it Patina Living. Now, I just thought it would be fun to go over with you really quick about this power couple that you have in Brooke Giannetti and Steve Giannetti. With Brooke, she's a California-based interior designer. She's got her own shop and she's a blogger. And so everything that she's putting together is just so artfully done. She's a natural stylist. And then you have Steve Giannetti. He's an architect and he works on all kinds of projects. And so you've got the two of them together and they work so well together. Now, in the introduction to Patina Living, today's book recommendation, Brooke and Steve share this incredibly heart-wrenching story of the time that they actually had to leave Patina Farm. This was back in 2017, 5 years ago, when one of the California wildfires was threatening their property. And so they had to load everything up really quickly, and they were prepared to say goodbye to all of it. And so here is this little excerpt from what Brooke wrote. She said, "As we hurried through the now mature grounds of Patina Farm, we were reminded of the time that we installed the new plantings that would become our outdoor rooms. Now, 5 years later, the gardens looked lush and lovely, softened by the pale pink haze of the fire, but they were also quiet and lifeless. Our donkeys, Buttercup, Daisy, Blossom, and Huckleberry were not grazing in the lower fields or sleeping under the pepper trees as they normally did. the protected garden and the animal barn next to my office, where our miniature pygmy goat sisters, Thelma and Louise, and their best friend Dot, and our sheep, Linen, Paisley, and Cashmere, normally lounged and played, were silent and deserted. And as we headed to our packed cars, Steve asked me if there was anything else I wanted to take with us. I looked around the house that we had spent years designing, and I realized that all I really needed to take, the soul of our house, was already securely resting in our cars. Isn't that touching? Well, later on in the introduction, Brooke sets out her goals for this book, Patina Living, and she writes, "As we've shared our journey to Patina Farm, many of our readers have shared their desire to move toward an organic, nature-centered life. Now, some of you just want to add more gardens to your property or to figure out how to have a few chickens in your side yard, while others dream of creating your version of Patina Farm with farm animals and a potager to grow your own food. And so we are writing this book for all of you to share why we decided to embrace this lifestyle and what we've learned along the way. And we'll also introduce you to the wonderful people in our life that have helped us navigate the winding road of farm life. And one of the most important nuggets of wisdom that we've learned is that there's not just one way to live. The idea of this book is to explain what works and what hasn't worked for us and why. And by sharing our journey, we hope to demystify the homestead farm lifestyle. And then she says, if we city folk can do it, so can you. So great testimonial there. And for me, what I love about Brooke and Steve and what they've done here is how authentic they are and how creative they are, because they approach everything from, I will just say, the Giannetti angle on design and also functionality. Because again, it's got to work for them because this is a working farm. This is a homestead property. And so while they want things to look beautiful, they're also pragmatists. And so I love that mix. Now, granted, up here in Minnesota, I'm never going to have the type of climate that they enjoy in Ojai, California. I'm never going to be able to grow rosemary and lavender year-round outdoors in my garden. But again, there is so much of what Steve and Brooke do here that can be translated into new solutions, no matter where you live. So if you're looking for best practice, then I think you cannot go wrong with any book by Steve and Brooke Giannetti. This book is 208 pages of gardens, outdoor living, all kinds of outbuildings, all kinds of spaces for animals, and a gorgeous potager to boot on a high-end homestead. You can get a copy of Patina Living by Steve Giannetti and Brooke Giannetti and support the show using the Amazon link in today's show notes for around $8. Fantastic deal. Way better than when I bought the book back in 2020. So great deal. $8. Well spent. All right, we're going to end today's show with the birthday of Charles Semick. He's a Serbian-American poet and former co-poetry editor of the Paris Review, and he was born on this day, May 9th, in 1938. Charles taught English and creative writing for over 3 decades at the University of New Hampshire. In 1990, Charles received the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry, and in 2007, he was appointed the 15th Poet Laureate Consultant in Poetry to the Library of Congress. Charles is one of the most compelling modern poets writing today. He once wrote, "Even when I'm stretched out in my coffin, they may find me tinkering with some poem." Here's an excerpt from Charles's poem called In the Traffic. What if I were to ditch my car and walk away without a glance back, while drivers honk their horns as I march toward the woods, determined once and for all to swap this breed of lunatics for a more benign kind who dwell in trees, long-haired and naked. I'll let the sun be my guide, as I roam the countryside, stopping to chat with a flower or a butterfly, subsisting on edible plants I find, glad to share my meal with deer, or find a bear licking my face as I wake up, asking, "Where am I?" Stuck in traffic, mister. And here's Charles Simick's very brief poem called Watermelons. Green Buddhas on the fruit stand. We eat the smile and spit out the teeth. Well, that's it for today's show. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener. And just a reminder that you have a standing invitation to join the free Facebook group for listeners of the show. The next time you're over at Facebook, just search for Daily Gardener Community, where you'd search for a friend and then request to join. And if you'd like more of The Daily Gardener, you can subscribe to the newsletter over at thedailygardener.org. And don't forget that you can also show your support for the show by using the Buy Me a Coffee link over at the website or in today's show notes. This is Jennifer Ebling. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener. And remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day.